Hi, everyone. But we will first start with the Nobel family in general, with the Nobel brothers, and actually their father, Emmanuel Nobel, who in the 1830s came after, I would say, after his businesses in Sweden went bankrupt. He decided to move to Russia, which was a very promising market at that time, 1830s. And eventually, basically, they started from scratch. It was like going to the middle of nowhere. Yet, I'm not going into many details here because Misha did a very, I would say, detailed tour about the contribution of the Nobel family in their, well, to Russia and the Russian Empire. So, but this is something a little bit more focused on something different. And uh, together with over the kids and the wife, they moved to St. Petersburg, and quite quickly they. But that's him, by the way, a younger photograph, well, at his younger age. Quite quickly, uh, they uh, they managed to start the production of weapons, and mainly the rifles, but also many other I would say items related to the warfare. For example, Emmanuel Nobel managed to get the big concession for the underwater mines that further on would be used in even in the Crimean War, which would happen some 20 years later, and then in the following wars as well. And they quite quickly managed to earn quite an impressive capital. So that's already the photograph taken in the Russian Empire. At that point, they were not the subjects of the Russian Empire, they were the Swedish. And well, obviously, they had to have some middlemen to facilitate all the deals. And well, mid 19th century, this is when oil is discovered in Azerbaijan. Well, it has been discovered in the Absheron Peninsula, actually a few centuries before that. But when there was a great, I would say, surge in the demand for kerosene, they remembered about the oil in the Absheron Peninsula. But the thing why in Azerbaijan the oil for a long time was not in high demand because it was very difficult to transport it. That's why only when in Batumi was opened a big port, and this happened after Batumi became part of the Russian Empire. It was the result of the Crimean War, one of the outcomes of it. So 1878, Batumi becomes part of the Russian Empire, and the port of Franco, the big port, opened up. So this is when, well, the accessibility to Azerbaijan that borders on with Georgia got a little bit, I would say, more foreseeable and more reasonable. This is when Robert Noble, not it was not about the oil first, but they knew that there was oil in the territory of Azerbaijan. So basically, they went to Absheron Peninsula. First of all, to look for cheaper resources and raw materials, especially wood for the rifles. Um, and that's when Robert realized, well, that's exactly where all the oil is. And the demand for kerosene was only growing because that was the main, I would say, the main source of energy for, well, yeah, basically one of the main sources of energy, one of the main fuels at that point. So, and then he realized, okay, let that there is oil in Azerbaijan. There is Batumi, really that far, and there is a port. Well, they could work with that. So basically, it was Robert, Ludwig, and Alfred, so the sons of Emmanuel Nobel, that went there to Absheron Peninsula to look for raw materials. And this is when they realized, well, there was just oil. And that's exactly at that very moment, there was, they just, they saw this upheaval of interest, the surge of interest in the oil. And then they realized they just were there at the right time and they had to seize the moment. Um, it was basically Robert Noble that had the idea of opening the oil company. But again, transportation. Azerbaijan, well, from Azerbaijan, you couldn't transport oil anywhere. And originally, they thought that the construction of the railroad would help. But the construction of the railroad, which would had that had to go through the mountains, so that also entailed tunnel making and many other things. Well, it would be more than one. It would be more than 1,000 kilometers, which is like 500 miles, and it would be very difficult, and it would take much longer. So Alfred Nobel came up with another solution: the pipeline. And within less, well, just within several years, the pipeline was constructed. That's also Alfred Nobel. We know that Alfred Nobel quite shortly left the Russian Empire and he went back to Sweden. So he was not directly involved. Well, he spent some time in Batumi, indeed, but eventually he would go back, and the two brothers would remain. Especially Robert would be especially in a lot more, I would say, more largely involved with all the processes and all the entire company. And this is how the uh, the pipeline uh, was implemented within several years. And by the way, that's also interesting that so this is Baku, this is the old map, right? The Absheron Peninsula, this is the Absheron Peninsula. The Caspian Sea is here, right? And there was also some raw resources in the Turkmenistan. But again, with the Caspian Sea, it's uh, well, there was no really much of their prospects into as to the transportation. They needed access to the Black Sea. So through Peter von Bilderling, who was one of the councils of the Romanovs in the Russian Empire, so he helped them register the trademark. He helped them establish the company called Nobel. And further on, by the way, the Nobels would actually apply for the citizenship, so to speak, of the Russian Empire. They became subjects of the Russian Empire, but before that, they needed some intermediaries, and so Peter was one of their associates for a short period of time. And this is how it started. So once they realized there would be ways of transportation, they just needed to uh, facilitate it, optimize it, come up with some, I would say, they managed to come up with dozens and dozens of different patents and different innovations that ensured the oil transportation, the oil delivery, transportation, and storage, and then also shipping elsewhere by the sea. What I'm showing you are the illustrations of the Nobel sites in Azerbaijan, in Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan, and nowadays as well. So there was built so-called Black City or Black Town. It's called Chorny Gorod. It's called Black Town, the oil town, and the same city was built in Batumi at the point where the pipeline finished. And this is the logo of the Nobel company. And you can see here fire. So this is there was a lot of symbolism in that. It was I would say inspired by Zoroastrianism, that religion of the fire worshippers. And since oil was the main fuel, and yes, that's, I guess, the connection here is pretty much clear. We will see a lot more of the Zoroastrianism in the following tour. So There are not so many photographs that I was able to find, but I think it's more than enough. And also, since we were talking not only about the Nobels but also other families, and also a lot of technical things, so I just decided to kind of summarize everything for all of us to just so we don't have to keep all of it in mind. So, as I said, Robert and Ludwig. Robert was mostly about the administration. Ludwig was about innovations, and they revolutionized their refining techniques in Baku. And well, again, it was all not about okay. The crude oil was okay. What okay, you have it, you explore it, you mine it, you drill it, but what else do you do? What can you do with it? You need to turn it into kerosene, into sort of lubricants and industrial oils. You needed refineries for that. You needed facilities for that. So they managed to come up with a lot of solutions. And their refineries and the techniques that they used 100 years ago, many of them are still used nowadays. So they came up with the oil storage tanks, the vertical storage tanks as well, the distillation towers. They're distillation towers, and they're big gallons for storage, and the pumping stations. They are still there in Azerbaijan. They're still there, and they were still used in also many other oil sites in the Russian Empire. So they were revolutionaries. They were pioneers of that, absolutely. They were not the first ones, right? But hold on a second, let me just make sure that the speed is okay, yeah. Now I got why it's going so fast. That's what I'm talking about. This is already the Batumi. So at the end of the pipeline, they needed again to come up with the tankers, to come up with the cisterns and the pumping machines, and again they needed the oil refineries. So they having the refineries on the site ensured a much quicker delivery of the oil to the end consumers, and they were built lots of facilities for that. And then, okay, you need to take it to the port. There was built a railroad from that site, well, from the Grenoble site to the port. And then from the port, you needed somehow to transport it. You need to ship it. So you needed a very special ships for that. And again, well, look, this is the construction. Look at all these cisterns. I'm not very well versed in all the terms about oil and drilling, so please forgive me. Even in Russian, I don't know these things. To tell nothing of what the terms are in English, but I think you can see a lot of very, I would say, familiar pipes, towers, pumping stations. Most of it is still used. Well, okay, maybe those are more advanced stations, but in a nutshell, that's the same principle, just the same principle. And this is the photo taken in the office of the Nobel company. They established they had a big office and a big house in Baku. There is still a big villa. And they also opened built a country house for themselves and also for the offices in Batumi. So they would be both in Azerbaijan and in Georgia. And just some photos from the family archives of the Nobels. So in Batumi, what did they build? So they needed some terminal for export. Then the railroad. They still needed the railroad. And as I said, originally it was quite complicated, but they managed to lobby it. They were even interested in the involvement of the Rothschild family of the Rothschilds when they offered the the Romanovs the share. Well, when they offered to participate in the construction of the railroad, and they offered millions to invest millions in the construction of the railroad. So the Nobels, even though they knew that the Rothschilds were there to take their share uh, of business, they were at least happy that the railroad would be constructed. So altogether, the big Baku-Batumi railway was completed in 1883. Yeah, as I said, it was state built, but yes, the Nobels pushed for it, and there was some private investment from the Rothschilds, uh, and it's a very well known fact. What would the railroad needed as well? Okay, we have the pipeline, but there were also other areas in the Caucasus that needed oil, and there was no way just for them to find the tap, open the tap from the pipeline, and just get them, I don't know, a couple of gallons of crude oil to go. So obviously that made things a lot easier and made oil just a lot more accessible and even affordable, especially if the it was already not the crude oil, but kerosene or lubricants or some industrial oils. But all that needed roads, railroads, given also the terrain, it wasn't easy. And also that needed the special containers, the special ways in which you could transport all these liquids, because all these liquids needed certain materials, needed um, certain technology to be followed. So with the oil export terminals, how would it look? They would build storage tanks. Well, the smaller pipelines from the big pipeline to the terminals and loading facilities. And it's important to understand that the port had just been built. There were no facilities for that. So they had to build everything from their pocket on their own. And within several years, Batumi became the world's largest oil export port for a while. Obviously, well, eh, thanks to the Nobels, but also to the Rothschilds. But nevertheless, then the tankers, the inland tankers, and the sea tankers, marine tankers were needed because there was no transport for it. There was no other means, so they had to build everything and they had to develop it. They didn't just buy it; they designed it and built the tankers. So Ludwig invented this first modern oil tanker, and it is still, I would say, in a nutshell, it's still one of the same kind of tankers that are now at least the kind of tanker that Ludwig Nobel invented are still used nowadays. Advanced, but you get the idea. Zoroaster. So that was used in the Caspian Sea. So that was used in a sort of a like in the inland because well the Caspian Sea is quite small and shallow, but obviously there was a lot of materials, lots of resources in Turkmenistan on the other shore of the Caspian Sea from Baku on the opposite shore. So obviously they would also need the water transportation to just have connection between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. Then um, they would be also invented they would also invent the big tanker called Vandal, and this is the tanker that would be used to ship oil. That's Zoroaster, by the way. That's it. So the one used in the Caspian Sea. Again, Zoroastrianism, right? Uh, Yeah, and that tanker that they used for the sea transportation, Vandal. This is the photo of it, the Vandal, like vandalism. I'm not sure why it was such a name, but the Vandal worked with the diesel fuel, and it was the early age, just the beginning of the use of the diesel oil, the diesel fuel, and they were not the pioneers, but they were one of the first, and they just quite quickly realized how convenient and how feasible the use of the diesel fuel was. So they were they were almost pioneers of the use mm, of the diesel fuel. Vast territories. At some point, at their factories, at their facilities, worked 30,000 people in Azerbaijan and in Batumi. Just imagine 30,000. That was just incredible. This is exactly one of the kind of the systems that were invented by the Nobels. And well, as I was told, such type of cisterns are still used, and those are rivets. So this is the very, very early, I would say, stage of the use of rivets. Rivets would be used at the turn of the 20th century, especially with the industrial constructions, especially when it got to bridges and like big metal constructions in general. So this is how, thanks to the Nobels, oil became well accessible to people in inland and overseas. So one third of the world's oil would be the oil coming from Batumi. I mean, from Azerbaijan, from Batumi through the Batumi port. Well, I think this is a big deal in general, but they were not the only one. Obviously, they were not the only one. We will get to that. In the meantime, remember I mentioned the house that they built for themselves, like a country house, a kind of a dacha or a villa, better say. They built the villa and the office, and around that office, there's I mentioned 30,000 people, right? So there were a dozen thousand people that worked for them. So they built a big oil town, and this oil town used to be in the same area where they built themselves their villa and their office. So they built it exactly in the same area where all the workers lived. So they built the residential buildings for the workers, schools, hospitals, everything, just to ensure the smooth work and mm, accountability for the employees. And that's the house. Unfortunately, it doesn't look exactly the same way it looked back in the days. You can see there were windows here, but they're not here anymore. And the Nobels in 19 there were several periods. Well, there was very difficult time when the First World War started, and it couldn't but have affected the business. And then the revolution. And after the revolution, obviously, everything was nationalized, and the nobles were not allowed to return to Batumi. They were not allowed to use any of the facilities. So, and for a long time, this building was not in use. It was neglected. At some point, also there were some organizations mostly related to some secret services, and that was it. And the building was almost falling apart when, in the 2000s, the ex-president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, decided to commission to open the Nobel Museum and pay tribute to the Nobel brothers, especially the two of them, but Alfred as well. And as I said, Alfred was in Batumi. He spent some time in Batumi, and he liked to sit in the courtyard or look from out of the window and just sip the tea and enjoy his time. He liked it in Batumi very much, but further on, as you know, he would leave. Yeah, this is just the magnolias in Batumi with a subtropical climate. Everything grows so quickly, and this magnolia tree, according to some sources, it was there already when the nobles built the house for themselves. So the museum opened. I'm not going to show you the entire museum. The museum, it's quite small, but it covers different subjects, different topics, not only the Nobels, but also other industries that emerged in Batumi. So, but we are taking it, I would say we are focusing mostly on oil. And hopefully next week I will be able to tell you more about the other industries, about the life of the port. And hopefully we'll be able to also visit the fish market with you. I mean, I have the videos. So I went together with my colleague Galina. I talked about her last year. So whenever I go to Batumi, I always hire Galia just to take me to places because I'm not local. I don't know where things are. I don't know what is worth watching, what are the gems and so on. So she helps me a lot, and she knows she's okay that I am recording it and making tours. So she's just happy that there is interest in Batumi and there's appreciation of its history. So there is uh, since there was nothing was saved from the times of the nobles, the furniture you can see here is just of the same period. The photographs are not the original, but these are the photographs of the nobles. And that's pretty much how their office looked like. There wasn't some, I would say, tailor-made furniture. There wasn't a big, opulent interior. So it was pretty much functional. Also, a lot of equipment that was used at that time. Lots of equipment of different kinds. Look at that. Just bottles, jars, dishes, very multiple things. We're going to have a Q&A probably now, and then uh, we will continue. We'll talk a little bit more about the Nobels and then about Rothschilds and some other world famous oil giants. Let's have the Q&A. I know that yesterday I just totally disregarded the importance of the Q&A. But today we have the time. Yesterday I had to schedule tours back to back, so I just had to save time. Now we can talk. Grisha, Grish, could you please bring me a glass of water? Thank you so much. So let me know if you have any questions. The chat is on. I would say that the Nobels they were the pioneers of everything with regards to oil industry in the Russian Empire. And but it was more than that. It was the arms, the engineering patents. Um, there were like hundreds of patents that belong to the Nobels. That's just incredible. And also, uh, since the Nobels were the pioneers and the trailblazers, and then obviously other companies would be coming too, which only brought and more created more working places, right? That created a lot more demand and a lot more opportunities. Sure, Robert, no problem. Okay, I'm just happy that Grisha is having his dinner and we can go on. And well, who cares that the delivery guy was late by 40 minutes? Well, it's not the guy, it's just the restaurant. Okay, let's go back to the museum. So again, I will be focusing only on certain things, and on the upcoming tours, I will be able to tell you and show you a lot more. We have some photographs here. By the way, the frames are also historic, not memorial, but they're the old ones. So they had the fleet, they had the little fleet to transport the oil. And since on the site they had the refineries, and by the way, the Nobels came up with a system of how to break the crude oil into different fractions and how to store it and how then to make kerosene, lubricants and industrial oils, and how to store them and how to ship them. All of that was developed by them. And further on would be I would say, upgraded by their competitors, but they were the pioneers of that. They Speaking of the competitors, so Rothschild, 1883, so 3 years after the port opened, and approximately the same time the pipeline already started working in full force. Alphonse the Rothschild from the French part of the dynasty, together with his wife, they came, and so they needed somehow to enter the market. So that's Alphonse James of Rothschild. And well, first they offered to build the railroad, right? So they invested a lot in the oil export infrastructure, as I said here. So the railroad, that was the main thing. There was the that was one of the railroad opening was one of the biggest advancements. It was not just with regards to oil transportation, but just people accessibility to Batumi, not only by the sea but also by land. Eventually, after that, the Rothschild opened the Caspian and Black Sea Oil Company in 1883. So they started exporting of the Baku oil from the Batumi port to Europe. They didn't own the infrastructure. It's also important to understand it was all state run, but indeed they had their share, and they it paid off absolutely, absolutely, because they were given some discounts, they were given some a lot of perks for that. They they redesigned and storage depot. They had they built a big depot, and also the smaller pipelines to prepare kerosene and also the crude oil for shipment, mainly to Western Europe. And they also had refineries in Baku. Their refineries were bigger. Some claim that the Nobel's refineries were better, but with regards to, well, they were all, I would say, they were all top notch. That goes without saying. And but the Rothschilds mainly focused on the export of oil to Europe, and also they were looking for ways of exporting oil to, exporting oil to other regions as well. The main idea would be to somehow make the Rockefellers uh, well worry, because the Rockefellers, as you know, they controlled the oil market in America, and they were very much interested in what was going on in the Caucasus. The Rothschilds, they were staying here. They built themselves this gorgeous home, and as you can see, sorry, the building is closed now. It's not in use. In the Soviet time, it was the maternity hospital, by the way. It was also at some point used by different organizations and also hospitals, and then maternity hospital. But unfortunately, they didn't live in this house for a long time. The main reason would be the malaria. As I mentioned on my tours, Batumi was it was very very humid. It was marshy soil and very hot. The ideal conditions for malaria. So eventually they couldn't stay here and they had to leave. And also an interesting fact, the Rothschilds, everyone knows now that Rothschilds is the Jewish family. But back in the days, they tried to hide it, and they when they came and when they offered those millions to the Romanovs, they wouldn't tell. They wouldn't tell that wasn't the common knowledge. So they and while they lived in Batumi, nobody was supposed to know that. But little by little, people started to notice something strange, like they are not taking the carriage on Saturdays and Fridays. They're not using umbrellas on Saturdays when it's raining, and they didn't eat pork. So it kind of, well, later on it will become clear, but they would have to move out anyway, since it was just no longer safe for his family to stay in Batumi due to malaria. But they still managed to operate the business, and the house is still here, and the maternity hospital is not there anymore. From what I know, from what Gala told me, that that they, well, the restoration is going to take years, and nobody knows what the plan is. And the maternity home, it's not like Batumi doesn't have a maternity home anymore. There's a big maternity hospital, a modern one, built in the new Batumi, because we are now in the low Batumi, in the flat Batumi, and that's exactly the area that will be developed at the same time with the big port. I managed to find some old photographs of the Rothschild house, but just very few. And there are no photographs of Alphonse and his wife in the house, and that's also the house from the corner. You may have noticed the big balcony, the round-shaped balcony that juts into the street. So that's the one. That's the house. Well, in the museum, they also have this interesting exhibit, which is a tin can for kerosene, and it has a shell there because it belonged to the Shell company, because the Shell company also came to Georgia. Well, I'm not going into details here, like why it is Shell. That's because originally the it was about just making the jewelry and collecting shells, and Shell just became the symbol of originally of the business, and later on Shell became the big trademark. So what's with the Samuel family? What did the Samuels have to do with? Well, they were mostly focused on kerosene and the shipment of not the crude oil, but the kerosene. They needed it fast. They needed it fast. They needed it, well, yesterday. And it was about just the transportation, making it like small quantities, small volumes, all convenient for the end consumer. So it was like 1890s. I'm not saying it was late. It was not late. No, it was okay. So this is when they established the Shell Transport and Trading Company. And well, they started shipping kerosene from Batumi to India and the Far East. And this was the, well, not the emerging market, but this was the gold mine. Yeah, and later on, they when they also realized they could do it B2B, it didn't have to be just B2C. They also invested in the development of the new generation of the bulk oil tankers. But that was well, since they were very much into shells, so they call this Murex, the special kind of the shells you can find in the Mediterranean. So Batumi, linked to Baku by rail, was the ideal export, ideal leg of the trip of this export. And then from the Caucasus to the Asian markets and India, so India and Far East. That was uh, well, and also because the Rothschilds were and the Nobels were also focusing on Europe, and they were also hoping to somehow replace or at least take the share of the Rockefellers. Well, but the Shell company had a bit of a different interest and a bit of a different focus. So uh, they had their tankers loaded with oil in Batumi. And later on, so they would be able to go as far as through the Suez Canal with all this refined kerosene directly to the end consumers in India, Singapore, and East Africa. So this is how, with a bit of a different focus, they managed to become one of the big competitors for the Rothschilds and the Nobels. Yeah, so they just had their share. On the one hand, they were competitors. On the other hand, they were not, because they had very different market. Anyway, so well, I'm just putting it here. So while Shell did not own, they didn't have oil fields. That's also important to understand. They didn't explore oil. They didn't drill it. They no. They basically whatever they just needed to buy oil and refine it, and then ship it, depending on the consumer and the market. So that strategy helped them grow rapidly. They didn't have to invest the gazillions of monies because of that. They did have to invest, but it was nothing compared to the investment of the Rothschilds and the Nobels. And that's how quite quickly they managed uh, to become, I would say, uh, the fully fledged competitors to the Nobels and the Rothschilds. So as I said, well, you remember from the outside there was a tower. This is the winding staircase. You can only access 2 floors with the staircase, and you can't go higher. Unfortunately, there are no interiors survived. We don't know what the walls. Sorry, just a second. We don't know what if the walls were decorated. We don't know what the furniture there used to be. Plus, we know that the upper floor actually was the residential. That's where they also lived. And well, Gala, well, we're talking here already about the times when I'm approaching the revolution. So obviously, in 1917, everything was nationalized, and nothing would belong to the Nobels anymore. The Nobels had to leave and leave everything behind. But the buildings stayed, the oil town stayed, the oil refinery stayed, and they just became state owned. Some buildings would be constructed already in the early Soviet period, and that's the example of this is the office of the oil company, of Batumi Oil Company, and the company is actually closed. So there is no really oil company at the moment, but it used to be up until the Soviet period. The pipelines would be working, the railroad would be working smoothly, just owned by the state. Um, and now it's all closed, and we know that some of the facilities, some of the buildings that remained, that survived, were purchased by one of the companies from Qatar. But so far, there's nothing. We don't know what's going on there. From the Soviet times, we also have this mosaic. It just shows you people of different walks of life and both genders, by the way, working for the company, well, for the state-run company. There's a Georgian woman. It looks like this is a Slavic woman, judging by the design of her dress, and also the men. I would say it's really hard to tell where he's Georgian or Azerbaijani, hard to tell. And here is everything about oil. This is Gala showing me stuff with her umbrella. Sorry. So the railroad, the tunnels, and by the way, the tunnels. In order to build the tunnels, they had to blow this up. So this is when again the family invention came in really handy. Unfortunately, it's all in a pretty bad state. This is sad, but it looks like there would be some restoration, or at least there is some work going on. And you can see there are cars here. So, but look, those are their offices now, and the company is not functioning. So there's no really oil oil pumping anymore over there. And Galia also took me a little bit around the area to see the checkpoint, to see the gate to the territory, because this is the basically this building was the replacement of the Nobel's country house, the Nobel's villa. By the way, this building was constructed in the Soviet time. That was the shop, the food store for the workers of the oil factory. It's the Soviet times. It was like a town. There was Batumi, and the oil town was built just next to Batumi. We are now going around this house. It's 1920. It's I would say very early constructivism, if well, or early, very very early, kind of the predecessor to the Bauhaus style. But it's not correct to call it a Bauhaus, obviously. So constructivism. So looks like there will be at some point some restoration. However, even though there is nothing there at the moment, and by the way, so the office would be standing like separately from the main site. We are now approaching the entrance, the gate to the industrial site. Next to it is, this is, believe it or not, but this is a restroom, like 1960s restroom, and so that's the checkpoint. They're not, even though there is nothing going on, we are not allowed to enter. So I was only allowed to film a little bit, and well, the guards just looked at me intently. I didn't feel very comfortable, but that's okay. It was fine. So the territory is vast. Imagine like 10,000, 15,000 people working. You can imagine how big territory is. There's also some photos of what the refineries looked like exactly here. As far as I know, also quite recently there were attempts to clean the facilities, at least to provide any pollution. And I want to show you one colored photo, not the colors, but the color photo of Batumi and the oil town of the Nobles. The photo was taken by Sergei Prakudin-Gorsky. I'm sure many of you remember him. He was the pioneer of color photography in the world. And most of his colored photo collections can be found in the Library of Congress. And this is the view of Batumi and the oil town of the Nobels. Look at that. The Batumi proper is over there, and this is the territory of the Nobels land. Quite impressive. And so why Rockefellers? With Rockefellers, that's interesting. So the Rockefellers, they felt the competition, they felt the pressure, because the Nobels, because the Rothschild and the Shell company were taking over the market. The Rockefellers were still very strong in the state, but it would have been a mistake only to focus on the state. So this is when the Rockefellers had to look for other ways, also had to look for other markets. And this is when they opted for the Middle East and Iran, well, Persia. And so we could say that Rockefellers were never really involved. They could not, because the market had already been taken. And for a little, actually, even if at some point they had decided to come to Batumi, to Azerbaijan, which we technically could. It was already too late for it, because unfortunately, the first crisis was the First World War, then the revolution of the Russian Empire, and then the nationalization that came with the Bolsheviks. So this is it. But well, Rockefellers kept a very close, very, very close eye on everything that was going on in the Caucasus. That is true. But they couldn't compete on this market. So they looked the other direction. Okay, let's have the Q&A. Sorry for the issues with with the delivery guy. And I've seen some notifications that my connectivity was dropping. Sorry for that. Not sure what's going on here. With regards to the other parts of the museum, the museum gives us, I would say, quite a detailed story of what other businesses other than oil and I would say the logistics, what other the businesses and industries thrived, uh, why the, and how how these businesses contributed to to the development of Batumi in general. Is this the Nobel family? Yes, of course. The Alfred, one of the brothers, he is the one who established the prize. There is a story there. It's kind of a legend, but also not the legend that because Alfred is the one who developed and invented the dynamite, right? Which was actually to be used only in for industrial purposes, right? To blow up the tunnels, to build the tunnels and other things. But it just turned out that, well, the dynamite would be also used for, I would say, other purposes as well. And well, Alfred just wanted to somehow um, compensate for for the reputation of the one who designed some of the most terrible arms in the 20th century. So yes, that's him uh, who had the Nobel Prize named after. Yes. Yeah, I'm going to grab the bite of the cold food that I have, definitely, and then I'll see you on two other tours. So in 30 minutes from now, I'll be talking about the Myasnikov Palace in St. Petersburg. Get ready for some gold and glitter, and then Jerusalem. Get ready for some dust and sandstone and history. That's the plan for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Let me share with you the links once again. So the next tour is in 30 minutes from now, and Jerusalem tour is basically just the usual time. For some reason, it won't let me copy and paste it from my phone. Oh yeah, no, I can. There you go. And the recordings of the live streams from yesterday and from today, well, the market tour by the lake and the ice cream festival are also there, as well as the tours for the upcoming two tours. I didn't have time to schedule any tours for the upcoming weekend yet, but I promise I'll fix it in the next couple of days. I would appreciate your support. You know, you can send me a PayPal donation. You could buy me a coffee. Thank you so much for joining my tours, regardless of the topic. And I try to keep it diverse so everyone could find something of their interest. So thank you so much, and I'll see you very soon. And hopefully, I'll be less hungry and less sleepy for the upcoming tour. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Cindy. This is the Homo sapiens for you. But thank you so much. Yeah, Maria, you're very right. It's yeah, this is the other end of the stick, indeed. But but therefore, thank you, Dorley. I will enjoy it. And for those of you who are interested in a more detailed story about the Nobels in the Russian Empire, not just Georgia, but I would say in general how they contributed and what is left from them in St. Petersburg and other areas of the former Russian Empire, that recording is available for my sponsors. Here is also the link and. To learn more about the sponsorship, and if it's just one or two tours you would like to have a look at, just contact me through my website. There are ways to contact me. There are my socials and everything, and we will sort it out. Thank you so much for everything. I will see you very soon in St. Petersburg. And thank you for your patience with me. Thank you. Bye bye.